Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Gerard Dwyer, CIO at Rivian. Gerard, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Matt. Glad to be here.
So happy to have you. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gone past their security. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the best solution at the best price. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Jer, for those who aren't familiar, which I can't believe there are going to be many of those, can you tell us about Rivian and your role there as CIO?
Absolutely, Matt. Yeah. So Rivian is an electric car company founded back 15 years ago by R.J. Scaringe, who came out of MIT, was very passionate about what was happening climate-wise in the world, and founded Rivian as a way of helping promote the growth of electric vehicles, seeing that vehicle emissions are one of the biggest contributors to carbon on the planet. And he spotted a space in the market where there was no electric pickup trucks at that time. And he made his mission, we're going to do the world's first electric pickup truck. And that was known as the R1T. That started production in 2001. So that was following a pretty big IPO. I think it was the biggest IPO since Facebook on the market, raised a lot of capital, as the car business is a very capital intensive business. It takes a lot of money. There's a reason there's been very few new car companies in the last 100 years, Tesla accepted, because of the amount of capital that it takes to get in there. So started production of the R1T, and at the same time had a full-size SUV, the R1S. So they were both built on the same skateboard type platform. And just to add to the challenge, because doing two cars as a brand new company wasn't really enough, we also had a partnership with Amazon to do electric delivery vans for them, and they started production that year as well. So they're the three major products for the company. They've been growing over the last couple of years. Sales solely in North America at the moment, vast majority in the United States, but some in Canada as well. And RJ's mission for the company is keeping the world adventurous forever. And the idea that he had is to produce vehicles that weren't just, hey, you should drive an EV because it's the right thing to do, is that they're phenomenally fun and engaging. And one of the things I really liked what RJ in the early days, when I joined, and somebody asked him and said, who do you see as the competition for Rivian? And I expected him, to say the Teslas and Ford and GMs. He said, our competition is Facebook. And I remember thinking, what is he talking about in this? He says, I want people to get out in the world. If the competition is like people being at home and stuck in screens and having a digital experience versus getting out there, going for a hike, going to see something new, sticking the dog in the back of the car, whatever else it might be, that's what I'm really passionate about. And that really stuck in my head as his philosophy as to what he wants this company to be. So let's get to Rivian. My own role as CIO, so I'm responsible for all our internal systems. Apart from one section, we've got a good colleague, very strong leader on the commercial technology side of it, but a lot of the software that runs our manufacturing plants. So that's in Normal in Illinois. So all the manufacturing execution systems, maintenance of those that run the manufacturing plant, relation to logistics and supply chain and finance and the people systems and everything that relates to running a business of this complexity. So business has grown. We've about 15,000 people in the company at this stage, so it's pretty substantial. We also have so in addition to applications, it's the infrastructure, it's the cloud, it's the on-premises, the networking elements that go into that. I also have data and analytics, so particular passion of mine, given my background, in particular in relation to that and how we provide the data to make our business process better, or our people better in our decision making. I'm finding a digital workplace, which includes a lot of the office productivity tools, but also our AI at work. So no conversation would be complete without some mention of AI in it. But we're in the early stages of that. We already had some early wins, but we see obviously such potential in these technologies, and how do we apply them to our business processes to make our people more productive and let them focus on the parts of the job they really enjoy doing. So as the company scales, leveraging these technologies is going to be more and more important. So that's another element of what I do as well. So very fortunate to have the position, rarely boring, as you can imagine. And I get to work with a phenomenal bunch of people. So I really enjoy it.
No, that's wildly exciting. I mean, geez, where to go? I'm like a kid in a candy store right now. So I'd also like to touch on your background, because I think it ties in so beautifully. So as we kind of piece all this together, you have a really fascinating background. I mean, I don't think we've ever had two CIOs on this podcast, and we've had a lot so now, and none of them have had the same. Yours may be the most interesting yet, and I'm gonna go on record as saying it definitely is. This is fantastic. So could you tell everybody kind of how you got into tech in the first place, and how what your path to Rivian CIO was?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I could probably tell from the accent, I'm Irish. So I grew up in Ireland in the 1970s, which was kind of a fairly depressed country, with very little in terms of technology as such. I think we're still coming out of our post-colonial state and trying to work out what we were as a nation. So I grew up in a rural part of the country, very conventional, happy upbringing. My mom was a school teacher. My dad had a little shoe store. So I always liked technology, even though there wasn't a whole lot of it around in rural Tipperary at that point in time. Went to college, and there was a lot of immigration happening. There was a lot of unemployment in the country. And one of the big things that helped Ireland come out of that was massive investment from American technology companies. So that started with IBM, with Intel put a major plant into Leixlip. And then things started to change very fundamentally when the likes of Google and Facebook, Twitter, and all these others started investing in the country. And it made a lot of sense. I think with the departure, from Britain from the EU, we're the only English-speaking country left in the United States. Very strong historic connections between Ireland and the US. A young, educated workforce were kind of anxious to do well, had that entrepreneurial type spirit, and a favorable tax environment as well. I think that often gets thrown out about Ireland, and it's certainly true. I can see it appearing in the background on your screensaver. But the tax bit is far from the only piece of it. There's some really interesting elements in there as well. I would give a lot of credit to Ireland's kind of successor coming out of that, to Ryanair, which is the Irish equivalent of Southwest Airlines. And that suddenly you had low-cost connections all over Europe. So it means young people could come from Bulgaria and from Norway and from Estonia and all these places. So you ended up with a massive amount of different languages and a melting pot of cultures in Dublin in particular, but also in Cork, where Apple was, for example, and the whole technology sector grew out of that. So for me, I started out of college in the national phone company, and the whole kind of a lot of parallels with automotive. Now, here was an industry that was the same for 100 years. So the nature of telephony was these fixed lines, and that's what it was. There was some variation, but it was the same. And these two major technology shocks came along, and one was broadband and the internet. Which meant you could pile a whole lot more data and more sophisticated forms of data than just voice and analog telephony. And the other was mobile, and the fact that you weren't tethered to a fixed place anymore, that you could be out and about with device. So that totally changed the industry. And I was very lucky to be joined the phone company at that point in time. And I remember even as a relatively young guy, like in my early 20s, talking to our CFO, who was very anxious to hold on to business fax minutes because fax was a huge amount of the profits of the phone company. And this was the equivalent of AT&T. And I, as in my naivety, was going, "This, you're holding back the tide. Like, broadband is here. It's just a better technology." So the company was adapting to these massive changes, as well as competition that was coming in. So worked at the phone company, started off in finance, didn't do anything much for a few years, kind of my early 20s. And then I realized I better do something with myself. So I went back into the master's in management information systems. And that was my introduction to this thing called the internet, which was very exciting. Again, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe it's like CB radios. Maybe it's maybe it'll last a little bit longer, but I learned a little bit about it. And at the same time, I learned about data analytics. So we had Ireland's biggest data warehouse, which was 15 terabytes, which you probably fit in a laptop now, but it cost something north of £10 million, this huge amount of money going into it. And we were using data to drive business decisions. So particularly repricing of calls and how that would work, because related to the government and the national phone company had obligations for how it would charge for customers. So using data to drive those decisions, I found that really interesting. Then we had Ireland's biggest IPO in 1998, I think it was. And it was a lot of naivety. We thought some guy called Morgan Stanley was coming over. A lot of us didn't even realize it was kind of a company, but it was all over the news and the TV, and it was exciting to be part of something like that. So I worked in the corporate strategy piece of it. And but the big changing point in my own life, I got a chance to go and work in South Africa. And I got a phone call and said, "Hey, you got 24 hours to make your mind up. Go, we've got something here." And this was a pretty unusual occurrence. So we went, my wife and I, we took the chance, went to work in South Africa and said, "Hey, what's the worst that can happen? We're all fired in 6 months." We were all fired in 6 months. Great experience. Like, South Africa is such an interesting nation, coming, early post-apartheid, was building up its telecoms infrastructure. The whole case that happened there ended up in one of the biggest court cases in South African history. Would be a great business case study of international companies not understanding each other and both coming to the contract with different expectations of how it all work. But I kind of learned from that. I can survive somewhere else, which was my big learning after 10 years after being fairly closeted in Ireland. So I went to work for Swisscom, the Swiss national telephone company. And across Europe, this was the time where mobile, as I mentioned, was doing really well. And the telcos were making a lot of money out of 3G telephony as people were getting mobile phones and texting a lot and all those elements. And what was fun as it leads up in my very long-winded story here of technologies is that with mobile data in 2001, 2002 with Swisscom, no one saw the iPhone coming. And this was kind of my big insight really over time, is like how quickly things can change, even in industry like telecoms that's been around for a long time, has all the same players who know what they're doing, and that the mobile internet, the telcos thought, we're going to own this era because we own the pipes, we own the infrastructure that connects the customer to whatever content. And they didn't see the famous line from Mark Andreessen in 2011, "A software will eat the world," all the value going to software. And obviously the iPhone comes along in 2006 and Android soon afterwards, and the value in telephony shifted from the telcos to the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks, and all of those content and software providers. And the telcos are left with the pipes, which is still a decent business, but relatively low margins compared to the margins you're going to get in software and everything that in that. So I think a lot of parallels to that today to what we see in automotive, where this move to software-defined vehicles. And so if you had two big industry technology changers in telecoms, in broadband and internet, and then mobile, the two equivalent in automotive, to my mind, are electrification and autonomy. They're the two that are fundamentally changing how cars are going to be built, how they're going to be consumed, the value that customers are going to get from motor vehicles over the next 10 to 20 years. So after being probably one of the very few remaining industries left, this huge shift to software is happening in the technology space. And where we see that is for Rivian, it's that the software element of the vehicle, the fact that you can think of the car as a computer on wheels, that you can send out an over-the-air update and fundamentally improve the vehicle over time. So even though you buy a technology, it's getting better in the same way as you can download a new update to your iOS or Android on your phone, and new version of apps as they come along. That's exactly what's happening in the automotive space. So I think that's this huge technology shift, but given the lead times for developing new vehicle platforms are 3 to 4 years, and the amount of capital that needs to go into it, we're seeing, a spectrum of how companies tackle this across the industry. And obviously seeing some very strong new players emerging from China, with BYD and others coming into this space where they built up a phenomenal capability in this space. So anyway, going back to where, for me, on this long bit, I joined Google in Dublin in 2006, and that was just hugely exciting. My mom, God rest her, was very upset that who are this crowd? They will they amount to anything? You're leaving the phone company. What are you doing? But she came around eventually, as Google was doing quite well, thankfully. And I did a lot of the data infrastructure supporting the sales organization internationally as we grew and acquired DoubleClick and YouTube, and developed all the products that were making Google successful. And if you think about this, was pre-mobile days, a lot of it as well for most people. Like, it was just fixed line, and then obviously desktop computing, and obviously mobile then came very big. I think like 2010, 2011, 2012, you could see this huge shift over mobile. Then I shifted internally to that for a few years. I wanted to do something different, so I did finance for all Google's data centers, networking. So about, I don't know what it is today, maybe a fifth of the whole internet is Google infrastructure in some form or another. They're also one of the biggest builders of servers in the world, given their model for how they do compute in data centers. And I had finance for Google's real estate and some of the other GA functions, and all Google's CapEx basically over a few years. And that was phenomenally interesting as you were investing in these huge pushes, something equivalent to what you're seeing today in the huge investments for AI and all the major hyperscalers thinking about how do they support this massive growth in AI. Then in 2016, Google's self-driving car project was being split out from Alphabet. So Alphabet had this concept of the other bets, and Larry, I think, and Sergey wanted to build other businesses beyond Google, which had been obviously a behemoth at that stage, and had various bets, including Verily in life sciences and Wing into drones, and Loon was internet balloon. And they took, I think, equivalent to a VC type approach and said, look, we're going to take these big, audacious moonshots at different technology problems, knowing a lot of them are going to fail, but a few might come through. And that's what happened with Waymo being broken out. And it was still in the years while I was there, we were going from having one autonomous vehicle on the road. The very first autonomous ride was in Austin in 2015. And it took another 2 years to get 3 cars out there together, which gives some sense of the lead time it took to develop that technology. And that was three cars together in Phoenix. And I do remember that day in the office. It was phenomenally exciting when you had 3 cars with no humans in it, out on the roads, going around and navigating the world successfully. It was all on live screens, and we're all watching it together. So I was the CFO of Waymo, running finance, but also running IT, and running the facility side of it. So that's where some of that element comes into it. Got to build up the technology capabilities. And then in 2021, I'd done 5 years of that. I really wanted to do an IPO. I wanted to see what it was like for a company going from private to public. And Rivian was in that really interesting place. I really liked the culture of what RJ had built and what the company stood for. I had something that could complement our CFO, Claire, who's phenomenal at capital markets type background. She was still learning about running finance functions. So I got to that for a few years. And then Rivian was going through this really interesting stage as with all the excitement of an IPO and starting production. And then reality hits in 2022. And all of the pressure of, we got to make money here. It's a tough business. We got to take costs out. So I headed up our cost management efforts over the last few years. And that was working with leaders in every single function to understand how do we make the vehicle less costly to build, so taking cost out of the bill of materials, the manufacturing process, the logistics processes, and everything, including the software that we used, across the entire bill, the contractors we used, so we could get to profitability and ultimately become self-sustaining for our long-term future. So we hit a milestone on that in Q4 at the end of 2024. We got a gross margin positive. So that was really exciting. I really wanted to do that. And then I was looking around and saying, well, what do I do next? And I noticed that the IT function, we hadn't had a CIO for a year. The previous incumbent, a lady called Diane Lai, who was fantastic, had retired, and there was nobody in that space. So I chatted to our Chief Software Officer, Wasim Bayan Zayed, to Claire's our CFO, and said, hey, I've always liked IT. I've always applied IT to business challenges. Can I have a go at this? And they agreed, which I really appreciated, getting their faith in me. And I took up that role then formally in March of this year. So I'll pause there. I appreciate a deluge of stuff, but hopefully a little flavor.
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, even that transition, there's so many lessons to be learned there in what you were talking about. So often when we hear these, CIOs give their kind of their story, tell their story of how they got to the top. I tend to think of it in terms of, young people coming into, out of college and into the workforce, and hearing these stories and the lessons to be learned. And yours is so cool and unique in that you weren't pigeonholed in, you didn't even like stick yourself in like, oh, I'm, even in telco, you were like, no, you know what, you almost took this entrepreneurial approach to your career, where you were just so flexible, and it worked. Right. I think so often people look at their career and they're like, well, I'm going to be a software developer, and they go and they develop software, and they tend to stick in one industry, and then they move up a little bit, and that's kind of it. Right. And then maybe they move into some management, and maybe they get their MBA, and maybe they move up and they become a CIO, and they're like, okay, great. But they really did it in kind of one kind of vertical, if you will, one industry, one way. And you were just you had this fun adventure of a career where it's fascinating. I think you can tell, like, your personality is very fun and adventurous, and I think that fits in with Rivian. And my guess is when you interviewed and for the job, they kind of get it. You have that Rivian adventure in your kind of personality, and I think that translates into your career, which is really, really fun and exciting. I think that that's a really cool thing for young people to see coming into it, because I think there's this big focus on you can't live to work. You've got to work to live, and you don't want to be beholden to the man and just working some 9 to 5. But you're out there living your best life in your work. And I think that's kind of the takeaway, is it can be really exciting. You're very passionate about it. And that's where, I think young people can kind of, learn from you in that regard, that you don't have to just be, in some cubicle somewhere. You might start there, but before you know it, you could be in another industry. You could be in another country doing something fun and exciting if you're open to the adventure. Is it that you were just open to the adventure and looking for it, or is it just part of your personality? What would be your advice to young people if they wanted to kind of follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think you hit on some key points there, Matt. Firstly is kind of that openness to something. What I've kind of realized is there's nothing to fail at. There is no failures, and all the things that kind of hold you back and say, hey, if I take this and it doesn't work out, well, what happens then? Which is a very natural kind of, nervousness that you might have taken a role. So that role going to South Africa, that proved to me like, oh, there is no failure. My worst fear of kind of what would happen with that job is that I quit my job I knew for 10 years and gone off and done this thing, and it all falls apart within 6 months. That's exactly what happened. And then even, I remember my first day in Swisscom with mobile telephony, I had no background in mobile. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get found out inside a day or two that this guy doesn't really know a whole lot about mobile. But you knew enough about fixed line, and you were able to apply it to what the principles were in the mobile world. And within 3 months, I was blabbing away as if I'd invented mobile telephony. And that kind of proved to me is that you kind of back yourself and say, I know enough about these other things, and I can learn what I don't know. So my kind of learning along the way was, hey, if you have 50, 60, 70%, that's more than enough. The rest, because you'd be waiting forever trying to build up that next level of skills. I need to do one more degree and I need to do this bit of it before I'm ready for that, for some role. And you realize, no, that's actually not the point at all. So even being CFO of Waymo, which is really exciting, like, well, we had our own equity. I knew absolutely nothing about equity. I had never come anywhere near it. And luckily our CFO at Alphabet, Ruth, said, hey, you know what, off you'll go in and we'll have people around you will help you fill in those gaps where you don't have those expertise. And that's what I've kind of learned in dealing with young folk, as you said, in their career coming up, is to encourage them. Don't be waiting. And especially, you notice all the analysis says that women will tend to do that more than men. If there's 5 characteristics for a job that the guy will tend to do, I've got 2 or 3 of them, that's enough. Whereas women will be more conservative and go, well, I need to have the 4 or 5. So you got to encourage people and say, it's okay. Like these bits of it, we can fill in around you with a bit of training, a bit of coaching or whatever. It's not going to be, it shouldn't be a blocker for you. The second part, as you said, is just a curiosity. So I've always been the case of, I don't see myself as a finance person or an IT person. I worked in strategy functions. I worked in pricing functions. For a while at Waymo, I was the head of HR, which was, I just wanted to do it. I thought, oh, this is interesting. Our head of HR had left and there was a bit of a gap till we hired the new person. Oh, let me go and do that. And you realize then you always take something valuable from the experience. Because HR is actually one of the biggest drivers of costs on the financial side, because your compensation strategy is ultimately going to drive a huge amount of cost. So I came back from that experience with a far better understanding of all the pressures the HR folk have to deal with. My wife's a HR lady. She said, remember, in HR, any good idea was because of the business partners. Anything goes wrong, that's your fault. That's just the nature. So I had a far better understanding of what a phenomenal job all these people do. The other insight was you see people at their very best and their very worst in HR. And obviously there's a whole confidentiality, which was a really interesting insight. But yeah, compensation, hiring, the crucial nature of hiring and having a high bar and getting good people in there, because we've all seen that pressure. Sometimes you have a gap and say, let's just get someone. You always live to regret that. It's really having that high bar, that they're a good cultural fit, that they have the skills and having the patience to do that. So having a strong talent acquisition team who are helping you keep that bar up in the company and having your own standards, a hugely important part of it. But to your original question, the big point was, I think that curiosity just to try things and go into things that you don't really know a whole lot about. And then the ability to take a chance, because that opportunity in Ireland back in the day to go to South Africa, it wasn't as if there was opportunities coming every 10 days. That was probably the only one. If we hadn't grabbed that one, we'd probably still be happily sitting in Ireland. We wouldn't get to be chatting today and life would have been different. So I'm very grateful and recognizing that often, these chances don't come along too often, and you've got to take your courage into your hands and grab them when they come.
That's fantastic. I'm going to ask one more follow-up question about that whole kind of HR hiring process and young people, because I think, if I'm some 20-some-year-old and I'm getting into the workforce, and now that there is not just Google, because God, I mean, the world changed so much when Google came around, and now suddenly you have all this information, the internet, and you could ask any question and get any answer. But now with the advent of AI, and you've got ChatGPT, and now you've got it's even more so, right? And so now I wonder if these kids coming into the workforce, as I think you said it very nicely, that you have to kind of take the chance. Don't worry about meeting all 5 of the criteria, right? And you can learn it now. I think it's leveraging AI to be like, you know what? Even if I don't know this, it takes me 5 seconds. And okay, great, cool. And you can learn it. You said it, within a week you're going to get found out. Well, you've got a week to kind of to learn, right? So and now with the power of the internet and AI, you can learn, I mean, everything so fast. You can ask ChatGPT to be your counselor and teach you. They're the expert. You teach me all about this job, great, and you learn lots about it. But now I'm really curious, kind of your take when it comes to where's that balance between the kind of not it's not fake it till you make it, but the having that adventure, is it and you have to have a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of criteria, and then it's the cultural fit. And I think that young people are much less um they're more apprehensive to embrace the cultural aspect of it. And I think that's a huge one. And I'm kind of curious your take on it, having seen the world from your perspective and now being where you are. For young people, what's your advice on that whole cultural fit, what you have to know versus who you need to be and how you need to interact with people? Where do you stand on there? What's your advice?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And what I've learned along the years, obviously, the culture of the company is hugely important because it shapes the obvious things and the not obvious things about how decisions are made, which people advance, how do we think about our customers, our suppliers, all our relationships, everything along the way. And it takes some learning and experience about what is the right culture for you, for somebody coming in. Because frankly, you come out of college or whatever, I remember I had my own jumbled ideas in my head of what would be like in the working world. Nothing beats getting out there and doing it. And are you going to be happier in five people in a garage or 100-person type company or 1,000 or the 10,000 or the 100,000, and in what industry and in what geography and everything that goes, there are so many variables to consider along the way. So the first kind of advice is, in general, is if you do have a sense for one example, I really admired my manager, who ultimately I went with to Google along the way, and he was an ex-McKinsey guy, and he was at the phone company, and he was ready for his next thing, and he said, "I'm going to choose the company rather than the role or the industry." So he looked around in Dublin, and it was like Google and eBay, and he was like an engineer by training, a strategy guy, and he ended up head of sales finance, and he just said, "I'm just going to join because I want to be part of what that company does. I'm less hung up about what the specific role is." And for young people coming in, it can be like, "Oh, I have to have this role." And like, it's more of, no, I'm going to get into that place because I'll navigate my way around it once I find my way in there and find what kind of be interesting. Secondly, is kind of that curiosity, that openness. You don't know what you're going to like or not like. And it's, again, as your own personality develops and even as your life circumstances change, you'll find that your appetite for risk or your interest in different areas may well find, like that data analytics thing, that kind of came a bit out of nowhere for me. Just something kind of clicked in my head. I didn't kind of be at age 10 realizing I want to be in that. I always admire people who kind of knew what they wanted from a relatively young age and were able to follow that the whole way through. It was being open to these experiences and saying, "Oh, this seems like something that appeals to what I like to do." So the few bits I would say is, yeah, firstly, is having that sense of do your research on what the culture is, because you can tell from some big companies. And there is a nature, if you've been around for 50, 100 years, they probably have a certain way of doing it. The benefit of that is you get to learn from people who are very good. They've honed processes, they know how to do products, they've been doing it for a long time, and you really get that expertise. So even in the phone company in Ireland, I got to work with people who knew telephony inside out, knew everything about how fixed line telephony work, and you've got to be part of that expertise and learn from them. And then it's getting to something new where nobody kind of knows where it's going. And that's what mobile was in the early days. That's what Google was in its days. It was all a bit chaotic and phenomenally interesting. And it suited my personality type because I liked variety and I liked that element of it. I know for others that would be quite disconcerting and say, I'm not going to be successful because I need a little bit more structure. So finding that piece that resonates with you. And the third bit of it, and I really don't want to undersell this because I think it's hugely important, is having mentors and sponsors who will give you a chance. So it's not a case, I'll go in and work it on myself. So that example I gave in mobile, I had a partner in the consultancy company I was with called Logan Orvis, who was very good in guiding me and helped me understand, because if I was truly in there on my own making it all up, it would be a bit overwhelming and scary. And someone coming along and guiding you and say, hey, this is, or point you in a direction, this is where you can learn. You still got to make a lot of the effort yourself, but equally, even at Google, I was fortunate. Google's first CFO, a guy called Patrick Pichette, or one of the early CFOs, took an interest in me in Ireland and gave me a chance to go across to the US and speak to some of the leaders over there. I mentioned Ruth Porritt gave me the chance to be CFO of Waymo. Even coming into Rivian, and our chief software officer now taking the chance on me, because there's more technically qualified candidates out there, and would have been a totally reasonable thing to do, but say, there's enough here that's a benefit and that we can leverage. And in a way, some of the facts he's not conventional is a good thing, because it's going to bring a little fresh perspective to some of the areas that we work on. So I think there are some of the things that are for people to work on. Finally, I suppose, is something passionate. I remember saying in the Rivian interview, the standard question, why do you want to join? And I remember I said to them, like, it's a truck. And I don't know if you're familiar, that the truck has this capacity at the back. You can put a kitchen into it. And it's just pull out kitchen with 2 convection plates and a sink and the whole lot. I said, it's got a truck with a kitchen in it. Why would you not want to do that? Like, that's pretty amazing. And it was an element of being passionate about the product or the contribution that company has about it, and finding something that resonates with you. So that'll get you through the days where it's annoying and people are people and you're fed up with something, because you'll always have that. And I would say to young people as well, that little bit of stickability and going, hey, it's like no place is going to be perfect, but if you have some of those core things are good, the chances of you ultimately having great experience are that much higher.
Well, I think that one is so huge. You don't see it every day. The people who are passionate about the company and what you're doing, I'm gonna bet that hearing just hearing you talk about your past experiences and how much you enjoyed that, and that you had this curiosity and you really got into it, whether it was the telco or Waymo or going to South Africa, whatever it was, you were very passionate about it. And I think that is the takeaway for young people: is don't treat it like a job where you're just going in there, you're clocking in, and maybe you could be working a side gig as well at the same time, and you're just double dipping for a few extra bucks. Freaking love what you're doing, really enjoy it, find something that excites you about that, what the product or the service is that you're doing, and then everything else will flow, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
I think from there, people are gonna be like, oh, well, he or she's a superstar, they're awesome, they really love it. Even if you're not the most qualified, you're freaking joy to be around and work with, because you're curious and you're excited. And I think that's the takeaway for every worker, from just hearing you talk and seeing that the success that's brought in your career and life. That's what people should take away from it, right?
I think that's a lot of it. Like you said, again, back 20, 30 years ago, you had a skill set of profession. You stayed in that company for 20, 30 years, probably. You might change roles within it, but you were within that environment. Then in the last while, it will be very few of your listeners today, or the young people, like say, will stay in the same company for that next while. So you had a skill set that you brought to different companies. And I do think now, with the technology going to where it is, a lot of it's the mindset. And so I can apply this and what I've known in different areas to different challenges, and not be as hung up on the company or the particular role, because it's all going to be just kind of, can I solve problems? Can I bring value to this company? Can I have an impact? And if you can do that, that's, I think, employers increasingly will be looking for, because a lot of the basic technology and the knowledge, it's there in different tools. Can you bring that to the place? And I do value that piece of that you mentioned, is that the personality trait I look for, number one, when hiring, is enthusiasm, which is like, skills obviously need to be a certain place, but a place of, are they going to add something to the team, a place to be around? And that's not necessarily, you need all the extroverts. That's not the point at all. Some of the most talented, impactful people I've worked in my career are more the introvert sided, but do they care about what they're doing? Do they bring that infectiousness, that curiosity? And that ultimately goes a long way, because you can coach the other stuff, or you can learn a technology. You can't, doing that to a mindset is that much harder.
I love it. Okay, let's now switch to what is Rivian up to now, because So what's going on with Rivian now?
Yeah, so it's exciting for Rivian at the moment. So our journey over the last few years was get our first products out there, the T and the S, and we've been on that development curve over the last couple of years and honing those manufacturing processes, getting the costs out of the vehicle that I mentioned so we can get to profitability, building out our commercial infrastructure so that we have the service centers, we have the retail spaces. You might have seen some of the major urban areas now. It's a big purchase for people. It's a physical purchase. So folk have to come and see it and experience it. And we've seen that. And we get someone in the vehicle, they go for a test drive, they get that exhilaration and that excitement, which we want to be part of that experience of owning a Rivian. So with that, the next generation that's coming out will start production in the first half of 2026 is the R2. So it's a smaller form SUV. So the R1 is a pretty big vehicle. It's only really suitable for the North American market. So you go to European roads, even Asian roads, they tend to be smaller. So this is a vehicle that's far better suited. And equally, the big barriers that we see to electrical vehicle adoption out there is price point. And we'll talk about the charging infrastructure in a minute, because I think that's just a fascinating part of it. What RJ, our CEO, talks about and says, if you look at the $45,000, $50,000 vehicle price point, there aren't that many compelling choices out there. So you look at Tesla's Model Y, is biggest selling vehicle in the world, phenomenal engineering achievement, but there's not that many other options out there for customers that are within that price point, because the R1S and T are more like north of 70,000, 80,000. And there's only so many people who can afford a vehicle at that cost. So by coming with something around the $35,000 mark, you're making this accessible to a whole lot more people. And ultimately, you can have that impact that RJ wanted to have by having the vehicle in hundreds of thousands, millions of drivers' hands. So that's where the company is very much focused at the moment, as we see this as an inflection point in that the automotive industry, it's a numbers game. You need to have, so last year we shipped 50,000 vehicles, which is fine, but not that much in the big scheme of things, relatively small. So you want to have the scale you need to get to. You need to have north of 500,000 million vehicles a year, and then you can start having the impact that you'd like to have. So as part of that, we're building up the brand recognition. So one of the things we did this year was sponsor South by Southwest. You're seeing those physical locations. We did our first connected TV advertising over the last while. There's some really cute campaigns there with people out in the real world with the Rivians, building awareness of the brand, getting people into the brand. But that's the big focus of the company. And the R2 will be the first of what we're calling our mid-sized platform. So the R2, and there's its sister vehicle then is the R3, which is a slightly smaller format again. And these were revealed last year. That just got a phenomenal reaction from the critics and the public who got to see a taste of that. So after the launch of the R2, the company's big focus is on our new plant in Atlanta in Georgia. So we are doing a greenfield site. So our site in Illinois used to be a Mitsubishi plant back in the day, and it's been converted and adapted to build the R1 and the R2. And it's a phenomenal plant in so many ways, but you have to make compromises because it was a legacy plant to be able to build our vehicles there. Whereas in Georgia, it's a blank page, and we get to build the plant from the very start as to the way that we want, that is optimized for building electric vehicles versus the normal plant, which is originally designed to optimize for building for ICE vehicles. And that all impacts the flow of manufacturing and where you put the various shops. So for Georgia, we're phenomenally excited in that we get to start from scratch, building R2s, R3s there, and you have the capacity to start looking at international markets from there. So that's what's ahead of the company over the next couple of years. So getting the R2 on the market in the first half of 2026. And as we look ahead then, having our very first greenfield plant in Georgia actually come online in 2028.
Nice. So you mentioned the charging infrastructure, and I think that's kind of critical to to the success of electric vehicles, obviously, and Tesla's kind of they kind of dominated that in terms of kind of getting superchargers all across the nation. So what's Rivian's plan in terms of the charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so that's we're building out our own charging infrastructure called the Rivian Adventure Network. So you might have seen these charging stations out around the country, and I think the main thing for chargers, first of all, are there enough of them? Are they located where customers need them? And then they have to be working when you get there. So we've seen some challenge in the industry with relatively high amount of downtime of charge. Nothing more frustrating in that you make your way to a charging point and it's not operational. So our network is up there exactly with Tesla's, is easily the most high performing network in the industry. So having this charging infrastructure built out there, and last year we adopted the NAC standard that Tesla has, so our customers have access to the Tesla supercharger network and other superchargers around the country. Next thing after that for customers is the speed of charging, and what we're seeing is huge improvements in battery technology coming over the next while. So we can go for a full charge in like 20 to 40 minutes. What we're seeing is as the battery technology gets better and the electric vehicle, I think you'll see more and more of the industry going to 900 volt technology versus what a lot is kind of 450 volt at present. That charging time will come down and down and down so that you get it. I think BYD announced they were somewhere in the 5-minute range or 10-minute range. And then it becomes very close to the experience that people have with gas vehicles when you're coming to fill up or you go and get a cup of coffee, and it's a relatively trivial amount out of your journey time. So I think that you'll see over the next few years, those combination of more and more charging stations, better uptime for those stations, and the battery technology and charging technology just getting better and better so that it becomes the range anxiety element, the time it takes to do charging are just become less and less and less, and people can focus on the driving experience. And for anyone who's been in an electric vehicle in a Rivian and the experience is phenomenal, like just the driving experience that's there. And we believe that's going to be the huge attractor as some of these friction elements that might have stopped people considering an electric vehicle are just going to disappear over the coming years.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And speaking of driving experience, what I hear talk of the self-driving from Rivian. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And so we mentioned that the big technology changes in the automotive industry are electrification and autonomy. And I'm fortunate to see a little bit of that on the Waymo side of things. But for Rivian, what we're excited about is that our R1 vehicles, second generation in particular, have one of the best sensor sets that are out there in terms of collecting the data points that are needed to have a great autonomy experience. Now, autonomy, I think if we think about it, there's these range of technologies and what it can do for the driver. So the early days, it was like level 1 type stuff, cruise control, that we're all used to and say, hey, this is a little feature that can make my driving experience that much better, particularly on long highway journeys. Then we get to level 2 type systems, and we're seeing these ADAS type technology. So it's driver assist. So it's very much, you're still in charge of the vehicle, but it could potentially follow the path in the road without you having to do anything. You can have eyes off the road for a certain amount. Now, you are still legally responsible to keep the vehicle in that place, but where it's getting to them with level 3, and these are some of the technology we've seen a lot of the traditional players starting to get into. So Mercedes have been in this space and others. Level 3 is eyes off and hands off. So you can be on the highway, you can be chatting to the person next to you, more engaged in the conversation because the car has got this. It understands where it is, understands what's around it, and it has the capabilities to behave appropriately in those driving situations. Where the big shift happens then is we go to level 4, where the legal responsibility shifts from the driver being in charge of the vehicle to the car being responsible for the vehicle. And we've seen companies like Waymo, as I mentioned. There's Cruise, GM's investment in that. We've seen BYD and others. Obviously, Tesla have phenomenal ambitions in that space, and we'll see what happens over the next few months in that regard. But that's a major shift, because you get into level 4 type technologies. You're saying the person behind the wheel is not responsible for the vehicle. They could be asleep, they could be drunk, they could be whatever, physically impaired and unable to drive the vehicle. So for us, we're seeing the kind of, I think autonomy has moved from beyond the interesting concept stage to actual reality. So for anyone who's been in San Francisco recently, there are Waymos everywhere. And you go to other cities, you'll see them in Austin, you see them in Phoenix, you see them in LA, you're going to Miami, you're going to others like that. So it's been proven that this can be done, technology, and they can operate safely in a complex urban environment such as San Francisco. So now it's a question of scaling, and how do you do it economically and profitably? And we're seeing a couple of different models in the industry, and a lot of the talk in autonomy is that debate between Tesla's model, which says we can do it with just cameras, and that our software is so good that we get enough signals from a relatively modest sensor suite, we can make the right decisions to a right level of safety to have the car behave responsibly to an appropriate level of safety that customers will accept. Where Waymo, I think, started then a slightly different place in the early days, has a lot more sensors. So it has not just cameras, it has LiDAR, it has radar, it has all these elements in it that provide extra inputs for the software to work on. But the trade-off for that is it's more expensive, particularly in the early days when LiDAR was more expensive. That's coming down now. So what all these companies, I think, are working on is to see what is the right mix of hardware and software that can get to a performance level that is acceptable to the public and to regulators. Because one of the fascinating things in autonomy at the moment, there is no standard for what is safe enough. So as humans, we do a test. The standard is the state driving test. You know, if right or wrong, and say, that is your standard. You go out and drive in the car for 15, 20 minutes, and the state decides then you are good enough and gives you a license. So within autonomy, there is no objective standard at this moment in time. So where is that bar that we need to set at it? Because the potential here for impacting life in general is huge. Like, so just today, as we're speaking, Matt, like the terrible tragedy is going to be 100 people are going to die in American roads today. Like 100 people, and 100 families are going to get that terrible phone call, that knock on the door to say somebody along them has died. But as a society, we accept it because they're all isolated onesie-twosies along the way, and we collectively buy into that so we can have transportation and we can move around. So autonomy offers the potential, level 4 autonomy, to truly bring this down and dramatically reduce the number of deaths while making driving more streamlined and providing access to people with physical impairments or whatever else there might be along the way. So it has this huge potential, but we've got to get through these next few years and find which business models work. So for Rivian, what we're excited about is our vehicles. We have a phenomenally strong sensor set in the vehicles, both the R1 and the R2, and a really strong autonomy team. So our team, led by James Philbin, who was a colleague of mine at Waymo, has built a phenomenally strong team. And you're seeing Rivian having these options now within this autonomy set to say, hey, where do we want to play? And particularly, what do customers value, so that they will pay for some of these features and say, yes, you know, it's worth it to me and my driving experience. So I think level 2, level 3, where we are at this moment in time. And then who knows in the future as to how things evolve. And I do think as the public gets comfortable with autonomy, because probably seen even in the early days in San Francisco, there was a lot of nervousness. You know, people saying these robots are driving on the streets. Now it's become one of the tourist attractions of San Francisco. If someone wants to visit, can I get a ride in a driverless car? And the public there have become accepting over time, once they've seen, hey, these things can be behave safely and not be overly obtrusive in how they behave. So just a really exciting space in autonomy, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. And any any idea, or can you tell us what the the future holds in for Rivian and self-driving, maybe which direction you might be going?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're just excited about the technology capabilities that we have. So we're seeing, I think RJ has talked about the hands off, eyes off type features that are going to become available. But if you look at those, do you have the pieces of the puzzle? So do you have a great vehicle in the first place? Do you have that sensor suite? Do you have that software set that goes with that? So we're really excited that we're one of the very few companies that have all of these capabilities, because the mindset has been the software defined vehicle, the vehicle as a software engine from the very start. So that's been the mentality. And I think that's been some of the challenge for more traditional OEMs who have phenomenal capabilities in building vehicles, but this mindset that the software is the most important part of the vehicle, that's relatively new for them. And it's hard to make that evolution over time. So we think that's given us a huge advantage and lays out a lot of possibilities in the autonomy space over the coming years.
No, it really does, and I think that is a really challenging thing for the consumer and for the traditional car manufacturer to kind of wrap their head around. Interestingly enough, I bought a Tesla Model 3 about 8 years ago, and I was just talking to a friend, who's looking at getting a car, and interestingly enough, every time I'd look at, oh, maybe I'll trade it. It's 8 years old, and I don't have that many miles on it, but it keeps updating. The software keeps updating, and so it's like a brand new car. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's in perfect shape, and it keeps getting the updates. So it's just like the new one, except maybe the steering wheel is a little different or whatever. It doesn't have quite the same look, but it's the same as the brand new car, which in years past, forget about it. That's not how it worked in the past. You want the new car, the new everything, you want the better engine, the better everything. Well, that came with buying the new car. Now you get, oh, you want the better self-driving, you want the new features. It's all just gets pushed down through the air. So it's this fascinating thing that I think people aren't really they're not really aware of it. You don't know it until you've heard it and you've seen it in play out in real life. And it is such a shift from what the auto industry has been for so many people for so long. And so I think the hurdle is understanding that, well, you can get in a Rivian and drive, and there are plenty of charging places. You don't have to worry about, this isn't 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where you had to worry about, well, would there, that range anxiety, would I be able to make it there? And what happens if I run out of juice, right? That's not a thing anymore. I mean, maybe if you're going into some crazy remote places, but for the most part, if you're standing anywhere near civilization, there are charging stations now, and you'll be okay, right? Worst case scenario, you just plug into an outlet somewhere, and you slowly charge up until you can get there. And so there's all these things that have to, I think, the awareness for the average consumer to kind of get over there's nothing wrong with cars. I think that, I love mechanical watches, and I think there's this love for mechanical cars in the same way. But being a computer geek myself, that computer on wheels, it's fascinating. I mean, it's so impressive. And so what Rivian's doing there, and that I think people have to kind of, it just takes time. People take time to kind of get up to speed on the fact that they can still get in. I have my mother-in-law has a Model 3, and she refuses to go out of town because she is still afraid of supercharging. I'm like, you're killing me here. How is this? How can you possibly, you've had it for years now. How can you still rent a car when you want to go on a trip? And yet there are people who are like that, who it takes a while for them to catch up. And so I think that what you guys are doing there is absolutely fascinating. I think it's super cool. Really looking forward to the new models coming out. Anything else you want to share in terms of the future of Rivian that you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, one other thing obviously being exciting for us is that investment that we got from a Volkswagen Group last year as well. And it goes very much to our conversation, where you look at Volkswagen, company being around for 90 years, built some of the most iconic cars in the world, a phenomenal brand and set of brands, like it's 12 different brands. You're looking at Audi and Porsche and Lamborghini and all these household names for there. Their investment in Rivian on our software and electrical architecture in particular. And that was a huge, I think, endorsement of the work that we've done in that space, of a company of that credibility and its scope to say, hey, you guys are best in the world in this regard. We want that technology to apply it to our brand. So we've been really excited about that partnership over the last, and as a CIO, it's been that interesting piece of it is how do we set up the IT systems? How do we make sure, that the joint venture has everything that it needs while still Rivian developing its own products. So that's been something I think that's been really great for us as a brand, because you're going to see Rivian software in all of these brands around the world, which is great for us as a company, and just so exciting to see is not just along with our own products that we can contribute to making these phenomenal brands better, and some of that, the huge advantage of software-defined vehicles applying in that regard. So I think that's one other thing that we call out that we're all excited about as a company.
No, that's fantastic, and it's huge. I can't help but think, when you talk about the CIO role there, I mean, it's a lot, and I think I'd like for you to kind of explain to the other CIOs out there how it's different. I mean, you've got so much technology that you guys are really you're on the cutting edge, right? This is the cutting edge stuff, and then to be in that CIO role, to be able to to be managing, keeping all the systems working, all these different technologies. I mean, can you kind of walk us through one, how you got how you kind of orient yourself to that, and is it seems like a huge challenge. I mean, it doesn't seem like a job that anybody could easily step in and do. So can you kind of give us a taste of what it's like?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's a huge challenge, but hugely exciting. So you think about it, the few different areas that have their own particular challenges. So one is manufacturing at the plant. So we have these, mentioned we're building all our R1s, we're getting ready to build our R2s. We have our vans, electric vans as well, that we partner with Amazon. So you got to build these things. So you think about all the supply chain and logistical challenges that go into that. And we have a combination of off-the-shelf type technologies that you'd see in pretty much any company versus what we're doing in-house. And that's where it's customized for what we needed to do. So part of my job is to be thinking about those architectures over the next few years. We think about where can we get competitive advantage? Where does it matter that we fully control what that experience is going to look like? And where is it, hey, this problem has been solved before, and we don't need to go off and reinvent wheels that someone has done very well dozens of times somewhere else. So a lot of those decisions. So as we think about bringing the plant up and making sure we can build a volume of vehicles that's going to be 4x, 5x than we've ever done before. So that's a huge challenge. And that means getting our processes better, working with our business partners, with the manufacturing leads, the logistics lead, the supply chain leads, and getting all these parts in there delivered to the line so you can build the vehicles on time to the quality standard that's needed. So that's a massive area of focus, and obviously feeds in through to the financials and everything goes with that. Our cybersecurity colleagues, and making sure the applications that we're using are completely robust. And then underneath the applications element, you have that infrastructure layer, the mix between cloud and on-premises technology. So obviously cloud has provided such a huge amount of capability over recent years. But for manufacturing, where performance is absolutely critical, well, when does that need to be on premises, and what that needs to look like? So some of those decisions work into that. So that's kind of one of our huge areas to say, right, end to end, how do we do the plant? Then we have other areas of the team, looking at the commercial side of it, that whole element. So my colleagues in that regard, and commercial technology, that customer experience. What does the Rivian.com website look like? What does the app look like? What's that whole experience when you're ordering a vehicle, configuring a vehicle, getting delivery of it, looking to get service afterwards? How does all that work? And obviously that's hugely important to our brand and how we present ourselves out to the world. So a lot of that is going to be in-house developed. And then we've all the back-end functions. Again, you kind of forget that we're a young company. We only went public in 2021. So basically, from finance side, being able to close the books within a few days versus waiting for a couple of weeks. For our people team, so it's being able to attract talent, run these processes at scale across all these different geographies. So part of my role is, a lot of it is really working closely with the business to understand where they're at, show them what the technology can do, deliver solutions that get them excited and show them more, because in my experience, it's always been a flywheel, a virtuous flywheel. When people get stuff and they can see what's possible, they want more of it and they will lean into it. We got to partner along the way though and build that excitement. And for them, it's building their own skill set in prioritizing and say doing really good requirements and having that clarity about where they need to go. And that's all in an industry that's rapidly evolving and changing. So that's the challenges really, is that mix between off the shelf versus what do we build ourselves, being able to scale our processes, get more consolidation and standardization, say, hey, we can't do it in 10 different ways anymore. And if we really want to get that scale in there. And then finally, that innovation piece of it, I think that's been critical to Rivian's DNA. So he mentioned those AI elements that are in there, and say, right, how do we apply that to different processes? So one thing we're looking at, for example, is that we're meeting with suppliers, say, well, traditionally you'd have somebody go off and spend a few hours pulling all the contracts and understanding the relationship so that the negotiators have all the information. Well, can you use AI agents to really pull that together in a far more efficient manner so that when we're at that negotiating stage, you cut out all of that overhead and that time, and you can get straight to the value of that relationship. So that's just one little example of where we can apply agentic AI to a process that makes our business teams more productive.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. So kudos to you for being able to kind of handle that and kind of get it all up to speed and run with that. So you mentioned AI then, and I'm really curious where you see that playing. You gave one really cool example. Is this something where you see it kind of permeating the entire company, or is that something that maybe in the years to come? Because you're also using AI obviously in the self-driving, so you guys are right there on the cutting edge of using AI, for those advanced technologies. So, where do you see that playing out for you guys?
Yeah, I see it being at the core of how we do our business over the coming years. So, and it varies. We're already at the plant using some technologies where you can use camera technologies to spot any little errors on the manufacturing side, let the technicians know before it becomes an issue later along the way. So I think you'll see more and more of that in the capabilities. You've seen any of the phenomenal plans that BYD and Zeekr and others have built in China about how they're applying AI and robotics to building it. So there's some elements of that going to be applied, and we're fortunate to have Amazon as our partner, is probably the best company in the world for logistics and supply chain. How do we learn from them and apply some of their expertise to some of our processes? On the business side of them, we've been rolling out some of the technologies like Gemini to our users, and who are starting to work out what can I actually do with these. And typically that's what I found in every function. You find a few people who are into this stuff, who are willing to take a little bit of their own time and apply it. So our strategy has been, first of all, make it available to them, give them education, show them what people have done. We've recently added one of the founders of Cohere AI, Aidan Gomez, to the Rivian board. He brings some of that expertise as well to infuse in everything that we do. So I see it on both our business processes side of it and on the product side of it, in autonomy and our product and everything that goes with it into the vehicle side of things. So yeah, very much this is going to be one of the major enablers, again, of keeping costs down. So we talked about that software-defined vehicles. One is providing great features, but another bit is of keeping the costs down, because the intelligence is taken out of every individual parts of the bill of materials and is inherent in the vehicle itself. And that is a phenomenal enabler for the company, both to give a driving experience that we wanted to our customers and being able to do over-the-air updates and everything that goes into it, but while keeping costs. So it's like this holy grail of all the things that you want from a technology.
That's fantastic. Gerard, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show today. This has been an absolute joy and pleasure. I think that the highlights of the cyber business podcast to this point, this has been phenomenal. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about Rivian and where they can find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. To find out more about Rivian, Rivian.com, you get to see all the products, what's coming, configure it. There's just the driving experience. You need to get into one of these. So I'd encourage anyone, if you can find a test drive near you, get out and see what it's about, what the experience can be like in one of our vehicles. So we do believe it sets the bar for anything else that's out in the market in the US. For me, I'm just knocking around here in Palo Alto. Been fortunate throughout my career to have a lot of people help me along the way and let me do things I wasn't qualified to do and offer advice and help. So I think that's part of what I look to do for myself, is really give back any little bit I can to those who are coming afterwards. Because you said, Matt, there's such a talented generation coming through. My own son is only 11 years old, but I remember everything that was done and helped for me along the way. So I'm grateful to be part of this industry and get to work with such phenomenal talent in so many different areas. And a big thanks to you for the opportunity to come along today and talk to your listeners.
An absolute pleasure and honor. Thanks, Gerard. And until next time.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.